You're listening to Wild Things and Wild Places, a Muley Fanatic Foundation podcast that aims to discuss issues and efforts related to the Muley Fanatic Foundation mission, the conservation of mule deer, furthering the sport of hunting, and sound wildlife management.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley fanatic.
It's time for Wild Things and Wild Places. And here's your guide, Joshua Corsi.
And welcome to Wild Things and Wild Places, and an exciting episode today. One that is very exciting for us, particularly as an organization, the Muley Fanatic Foundation. We had gone into this effort and this endeavor beginning on October 26th of 2021 with the official MFF Fellow announcement through the University of Wyoming and the Hobbs School. And joining me today, who is about to wrap up her PhD here on October 2nd, I have Tayler LaSharr visiting. And Tayler, it's great to have you on this episode.
Thanks, Josh. I'm really excited to be here and talk about some of the work we've been doing.
Yeah, you guys have been doing a lot of work. We had Kevin on. We've had Rebecca. We're going to have Mitch. I mean, I want to get to Rhiannon. I mean, the great team of scientists at Monteith Shop hosts is doing all tremendous work, and it's all very different work, but it's all tied together, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, for sure. In part because the projects that we do are these really long-term and individual-based projects, and because of that, we have lots of different people working on different components of that, and we get to work together to answer a lot of really cool questions.
Yeah, and your work specific could not be more timely. We're going to get into that. But Kevin was very adamant that we talk about the MFF Fellow and what that is, why that is, and how you were given the nod for that and what that means. And so if we could, I'd like to start with that if that's okay with you. We had that great gathering in October of 2021 to announce this. It was a significant financial commitment on our organization's behalf, $250,000, $50,000 over 5 years for you to be the first MFF Fellow. And really from all the research we've been able to do, including Kevin, and anybody else in the academia world that was trying to solidify so we could say this is the first MFF Fellow, not just MFF, but Fellow program specific to mule deer at your educational level, wrapping up your PhD. I would say that's historic.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I'm incredibly grateful and honored to be able to be in this position right now and to represent you guys and the research that we do at the same time. And it's this fellowship program has really allowed us to kind of move forward with some of the mule deer work we've been doing and not have to constantly be trying to find funding to keep students on and to keep the researchers who are actually looking into these questions. And so this is, what you guys did was a huge thing for mule deer and the University of Wyoming.
Well, we're glad for the partnership as well. I can tell you, I don't think, knowing none of us had a crystal ball at the time, but the focus and the efforts that you were going to put forth for this program, where you would be focused on the understanding the effects of severe winters, from the noticeable effects at the population level to the more persistent effects that may be lasting among individuals that survive such life-threatening events. Who would have known the winter we would have to come just a couple years later and what that would look like? But boy, if there was a certain need for that type of timeliness, to say it's a coincidence is just, that just doesn't cut it. This was significant.
Yeah, it was.
I had a good visit with Dr. Monteith on this past winter, which has been well documented and discussed by many. But your intimate understanding and the investment of time and equity that you have had with these individual critters, it is profound. And I think that's where I'd like to start. I think we have a lot of things we could talk about on this, but I think for the overall just education and understanding of how that individual effort you have had with these critters, I think it tells a beautiful story that people will want to hear, that should hear. I think if we could, let's start with that. You have some time involved and invested into this range, in this herd.
Yeah. So Kevin talked about this a little bit when he was on, but the project started in 2013, And then in 2015, we started capturing fawns. And I finished my undergraduate in the spring of 2015. And then I worked as a technician on the Wyoming Range Project before starting my master's in the Monteith Shop, which was focused on how hunting influences horn size and bighorn sheep. And I was really fortunate in that project that I didn't have field work. And so I was able to spend a lot of my time helping out some of the other students and projects and researchers in the Monteith Shop during those first few years. And so I worked as a tech in 2015, and then I spent the next few summers helping Sam Dwinell when she was running the Wyoming Range Project, capturing fawns and doing veg work. And then in 2018, I started my PhD, which was focused on how bad winters influence this population. And so I started running the field work. And now Rebecca Rafferty, who I think you said was on already, she's now running the field work. But over the last 8 years, I've had a really fortunate opportunity to work with these animals and build a relationship with them in a way that I don't think I ever will have with another population of wildlife. For the work that we do, we're following these animals for their whole life. So we catch them, and we catch them each spring and each fall to look at the condition that they're in as they're coming off of their seasonal ranges and how they've used the resources that are available to them. But we're also capturing their fawns, so we know if they're pregnant, how many fawns they're pregnant with, if their fawns live or die and how they live or die. If those fawns do make it to adulthood, we follow those individuals through time. And so for a lot of the animals in this population, I've known them what feels like intimately for almost a decade. I've captured many of them when they were just a day old and watched them grow up and learn to migrate and navigate their first winter, and then become an adult and give birth to their own offspring, and then captured those offspring. And my work is primarily focused on how the bad winters are affecting this population, and that stemmed from actually the first bad winter that we had after the project started in 1617, which at the time we thought was particularly bad, and we now know that that was kind of a drop in the bucket compared to what we just saw this past winter. But all of these animals that I've grown to know and love for how they make a living, 80% of them didn't make it through this winter.
Yeah,
And
that had to be very tough, I would imagine, Taylor, just knowing that you've had this investment and knowing that you're a scientist and a tremendous scientist and being able to put together this data set, but then to lose it essentially, or to have it stop, I guess is, you didn't lose it. I mean, I think there was probably some learning there, but to know that it ended with an entire block of just data come to an end, and then how it ended. I mean, it was devastating, I would imagine. Did it take a toll on you emotionally?
yeah, and it was, so this winter was a little bittersweet for me because I wasn't doing a lot of field work. Because I'm working towards finishing up my PhD, I've transitioned to being in the office much more. And so, which
I don't mean to interrupt you, but that is huge. And October 2nd is a day of celebration. Cheers in advance.
Yes,
Dr. LaSharr to be announced. That's a
excited.
process.
Yeah. But because of that, I wasn't in the field a lot, which I think was good in a way, because I think it would have been much, much harder if I was picking up a lot of these mortalities.
I am curious, when you, being though that you were in the office and wasn't seeing this firsthand or on the recovery of these, you were still getting the emails and the mortality signals. Some of these critters that you have had close to a decade or, 6-8 years of multiple levels of, involvement from the first to the second to what becomes generational, 5 generations down the road, 6 generations down the road, just to see this complete loss. Even on an email, I would think that would be hard.
Yeah. And it is. And Kevin talked a little bit about this. It is devastating for a lot of reasons. One, we did lose a lot of this data that we've been building for a decade. And that's in itself, as a scientist, very sad. But also as a human, I think it's equally sad because I've built these relationships with these animals. And in a way, my strongest relationship with this population is through the research that I do and the questions that I'm asking and the things that I'm trying to learn from them. But how I interact with these animals is probably not that different than how people who live out here interact with them, because I would go and I would see the same deer give birth in the same meadow year after year. And I would go in each year and I would capture her fawns and I would get to watch her through my binoculars. And I would get to go back throughout the summer to collect information on what she was eating or the plants she had available to her. But that's not any different than the hunters who spend each fall in the same basin and watch bachelor groups that might not be there this year, or the people who go and watch the bucks on winter range and can watch those animals as they grow from 2-year-olds to impressive 8-year-olds. And so I think it's going to be something that not just researchers, but anybody who loves this population and spends time out here is going to have to kind of come to terms with over the next few years, because this population has changed so dramatically from this bad winter.
Yeah, significant.
Yeah.
Catastrophic.
Yeah.
We've talked about that. I can't come up with another adjective to describe it. It really has been catastrophic. You've kind of indicated some things that I think probably need a little bit better or further explanation for someone who may not be familiar with the process. But when you talk about glassing, I mean, obviously the capture is very hands-on. That process is probably well understood. That's done twice a year. But that field work during the summer, and that's really where this investment of your time really takes hold to have that intimate understanding of these critters. When you are spending that type of time behind a set of binoculars and watching and learning, and then the fecal collection of being able to use that information, take that back to the lab, look at their nutrition. What else are you looking for when you're collecting poop?
We go in. The majority of our summers that we spend are looking at diet and habitat. And so a good portion of it is looking at the plants that are there, but we also do fecal sample collections. And that allows us to, we basically go into the home ranges of each individual deer, and then we look for fresh fecal samples and we pick them up and then we freeze them until we can send them to the lab for analyses. And then when we send them in, it allows us to understand what plants the deer are eating to get a better understanding of where they're getting their nutrition from. Yeah,
that is multifaceted in how that information can be beneficial for wildlife managers, conservation groups like ourselves with specific habitat treatments. The summer of 2022 was decent and good nutrition on the landscape.
Yeah.
It just could not offset the uppercut from Mother Nature in the harshness of this winter, could it?
Yeah. So some of the work that I did for my PhD was looking at what affects overwinter survival of these deer. And the main things that we found is that nutrition is a huge driver, which probably isn't that shocking to anybody, but with the long-term nature of the work that we have, it allowed us to really tease apart where they need to be starting winter, given an average winter or a severe winter, if we're going to see high survival. And so from the analyses that I did, we just published the paper, but we submitted it before this bad winter happened. So we don't have any data from this past bad winter, but it still is enough. And with the variation that we had in the 16-17 and the 18-19 winter is enough for us to understand how snow depth, the food they have available to them on their winter range, so sagebrush, and then the fat that they have on their backs, how those things interact to influence survival. And in a normal winter, if animals are starting with 10 to 12% fat, they have a pretty good chance of making it. When those winters get a little bit harsher, seeing them start with 15 or 16 is a lot better. And we have seen in the Wyoming range, we've seen deer that have been at almost 25% body fat, which is like the extreme that they can be at. Like that's not a common thing, and it's almost impossible if they're raising fawns to also enter with 25% body fat. But it is possible for these animals, if they have access to good food on their summer ranges, to be able to build up enough fat to buffer themselves against these bad winters. But when the snow is as deep as it was this past winter, and these animals they couldn't access any sagebrush. They had to break through feet of snow, which is energetically costly. It's the same as if you or I were trying to post hole through 3 feet of snow. We're going to use a bunch of energy to do that.
And barriers of ice.
Yeah. They had to crush through it. And that takes so much energy, especially when they're not able to access the sagebrush. And then at the same time, they're faced with the energetic costs of trying to maintain their body temperature in these freezing temperatures. And that's just, this winter was so extreme that even starting with 10 or 12% fat wasn't enough for them.
Yeah, and your time in watching these critters grow, again, you many times there within hours after they have been born, being able to get some measurements, do some battery of tests that need to be done for you to complete your data set of what you're compiling with information from prior years. As they're learning and making decisions, and you're an observant at that point in the spring and in the summer, was there one that, maybe not just one specific deer, but was there one effort there that you just thought was so fascinating that it just kind of had a pull on your heart that said, this is not just a deer. This is something so much more.
Yeah, I like to say this is my favorite deer almost any time we go out on any deer. So it's hard for me to choose a favorite. But there are some, especially the ones that have been in the study since the beginning, and you get to go back year after year to catch their fawns, and you get to visit them on their summer ranges many times. Those are the ones that I start to really connect to, and like they're the ones that I feel the most sad about when they die, I think. But so there was a deer. She actually died a couple years ago. She was harvested actually by a youth hunter, I think, because she was a female in the Wyoming range. But she didn't live in a super cool place. She was a couple hundred yards off the road in some pretty dense forest. But she was incredibly good at being a mom. She almost always raised her fawns throughout the summer. She raised actually 2 fawns after the 16-17 winter, which animals in the spring of 2017 were in very rough shape. And the ones that did survive had almost no resources left. But despite the fact that she didn't have a lot of resources, she was able to raise her both son and daughter to adulthood. Both of them lived to adulthood. Her daughter is still alive and made it through this past winter, and she is now giving birth as a mother. And her son, actually, so at the time we weren't catching bucks, so we didn't add a component of looking at males until 2018. And so her son, who was born in 2017, he still had a fawn collar on. So the fawn collars expand as they grow, and so they'll fit an adult. And so from 2015 to 2017, all of the bucks that we caught as neonates or as newborn deer, we weren't recatching as adults. And then in 2019, we were out doing our spring captures, and David, the helicopter pilot, radioed into Kevin and was like, "There's a buck out here who has a really weird collar on. Should I bring him in?" And Kevin's like, "Yeah, sure. Let's see what it is." And it was actually Deer 96's son. And I was so stoked to see that. And then, so we put a collar on him. So we didn't have him. There was a small period of time where he wasn't, we didn't know where he was, from when his fawn collar fit, like the battery on it died, to when we captured him again opportunistically. But then following that, we captured him as a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old. And he was incredibly small. His antlers were tiny. It's very likely that that's an effect of that bad winter that his mom experienced while he was gestating in the womb. But she still was able to, despite the fact that it was such a terrible winter, they had no resources available. And you can clearly see the effect of it on her offspring. He never grew big antlers. His mom was still able to raise both him and his sister to adulthood. And so she's not that deer. She wasn't anything special, but she was incredibly special at the same time.
That's fascinating, Taylor. That's tremendous to be able to have that big and wide view of the entire process. I would imagine knowing, her mortality to the loss of hunting, which I would think is, that's part of the process. We know the role that hunters play. That probably is a little easier to take than it would be if it was smacked by a Ford F-150 on a highway.
Yeah, I think honestly, we've lost a couple to fences and a couple to vehicle collisions, and those are the hardest ones for me, because those are preventable. Those are things that, and we have in Wyoming made huge strides to reduce the amount of sheep fencing and to add underpasses and overpasses for these animals, but they're still having to navigate these complex features that are just scattered across their entire landscape, and sometimes it ends in their mortality. And that is pretty sad.
Yeah, I want to go back real quick to, and at this point, it would be nothing but pure speculation. But in light of this harsh winter that we have had, knowing that we have this tremendous green wave on the landscape as it continues to persist in many areas of the state with the tremendous amount of moisture that we've seen in June, the vegetation and the nutrition on the landscape is, I mean, it's almost historic in itself. It's absolutely incredible. But not having the density of the deer on the landscape, that potentially could be what would result in 20+% body fat. Right?
Yeah. So another part of the work that I did for my PhD is looking at, after that first bad winter that this population had, how they shifted what they were doing and if they were becoming maybe a bit more selfish. And when I say selfish, I don't necessarily mean they're like making a choice, but animals only have so much energy in the summertime, and they have to do two very important things: raising their fawns and then building up those fat reserves, which are necessary for them to survive. And so after that first bad winter, when many deer had a near-death experience, they had no body fat as they were coming off of it and nearly died. We wanted to see if they shifted what they were doing to potentially hedge their bets in case they faced another bad winter. And so what we saw was that after that bad winter, animals did favor accumulation of their own body fat, and that likely comes at the cost of their fawns. So we didn't see a difference in recruitment, but what it means is that they're probably not producing fawns that are quite as big or quite as hardy after that bad winter. And what that does is it allows them to survive and have the opportunity to reproduce again in the future instead of putting all of their energy into a fawn that they hope makes it through. That was the first part that we saw. But the second thing was that with the pretty big reduction in density that we saw after the 16-17 winter, animals also were able to accumulate much more fat. So we looked at a metric of the amount of precipitation, which we're using as a proxy for the food they have available to them, because we know that with more moisture, they have more food. So the more food that they had per individual on the landscape, they could put on much more fat. And with that reduction, that allowed them to do it. And this past winter, we saw a huge reduction. And so there's so many groceries on the landscape. There's so few deer. And so I'm sure that this winter we're going to see them in very, very good shape.
Yeah. Where do you, in your own thoughts, where do you see this 3 years from now?
This population?
Yes.
That's a good question that I don't know.
I mean, there's so many variables that are unknown that play into that. But is there some optimism? I mean, is there some hope?
Yeah, I think so.
And there has to be, right?
Yeah. And this winter was a 1 in 100 event.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've heard. I mean, generational.
Yeah. So they're not going to experience, I hope they're not going to experience something like this again for at least 100 years. And so if they're not facing those extreme conditions, which are just not survivable for anything, given the reduction that we saw and the fact that these animals have shifted how they're using the energy in the summer, I would guess that we're going to see the population increase, assuming that we don't see another devastating winter or we don't see an incredibly dry and drought-like summer.
Yeah, there are some things that we have learned from this winter. I think not only just as a general concerned population of concerned citizens, wildlife managers. One question that continues to come up, and I do not want to put you in an awkward spot. I know you were a scientist, not an advocate. The Monteith Shop has always been very keen on making that position very well known. That maintains your credibility. But there was a lot of conversations this year about, there's some other states to our west, Idaho and Utah, that were very proactive, that are now starting to release some results, that they had some good success with some supplemental feeding. Mm-hmm. The timing of that all seems to be such a critical component, being prepared and ready to have that ability to mobilize, knowing that there is a transition of the digestive system that needs to take place for the rumentology of how that would be of benefit and be able to process and not be a detriment in itself. But are some of those things worth more conversation?
I think that conversations about them are good. I do think there is a lot of risk that goes along with winter feeding, whether it's related to their digestive systems and the ability to transition, or the fact that if we feed, they're going to be congregating in super tight areas. And this population right now doesn't have a very high prevalence of CWD. And if we put them all in the same spot and CWD starts to spread, that's something that we don't have the ability to go back and
you can't
and
unwind
change.
that.
Yeah. And so I think there are a lot of things that need to be considered before something like that happens. And especially given that this was a 1 in 100-year event, these animals aren't going to see this level of mortality again for a long time, hopefully.
Yeah, that is a talking point that tends to gravitate to a risk or something to be considered when giving even just the consideration to that conversation. The other component, who I know you're very in tune with and have spent a lot of time yourself helping contribute to this analysis and this data, but the importance of migration and how that potentially could interrupt or be an obstacle for future generations. You spent so much time talking about the learning of how these deer have to be able to move and continue to navigate, and then to be able to show and share that with future offspring, that this year's, and then that just generational cycle of how that persists. But I would think that's something that also needs to be part of the conversation as a very legitimate concern.
Yeah, for sure. So Rhiannon Jacopak, who's a research scientist, she's the one who's really in earnest leading those efforts of learning how these animals are learning how to migrate as they grow up. And it's hard to get the data to actually see that, because you need to know where they were from the beginning of their life until they're a fully established grown adult. And with the 3 bad winters we've had, it's been difficult to get enough of a sample size to look at that. I think she's finishing up a manuscript right now. And so hopefully that research will become published and available in the next year or so. And
I very much look forward to having some conversation with Rhiannon.
But because deer are so faithful in what they do, understanding, and adults are following the same migration routes year after year. And if we lose those routes, regardless of how these deer are learning to migrate, if we have no deer that are following these same pathways, we are potentially losing huge areas of land that these animals could be spending their summers on.
I know you'll be sticking around in the Cowboy State as a postdoc following your culmination of your PhD coming up here in a couple of months. I have had several members of ours just in frank conversations. I've even had some of these conversations at the fueling station, when someone sees the truck and wants to talk about deer, which is great for me. There are several municipalities around the Cowboy State that have what is called town deer that people, get frustrated with. They can be damaging to one's magnolias and et cetera. But also, and I'm curious, as a postdoc, do you think there is potentially some effort and some research that could be done on looking, although I know the risks with CWD, as you just indicated, that's always going to be a concern when you start looking at disrupting the natural cycle of movement and placement of deer. But do you think that there is a worthy investment to be made at looking at where our population is now and the lack of density compared to what it has been? Looking at some of these areas where deer they don't leave town. They're born in town. That's all they know. They're programmed, the fidelity to stay there. They're not going to leave. Would there be a potential research project to look at seeing if the department would be interested in then using a resource like the Hobbs School to have that type of work to continue in just trying to understand even more? I've always said that, we're only as good as the information we have. We need to put the right tools in the toolbox to make the right decisions. But translocating deer from a city or a suburban municipality into some of these vast landscapes, is that an option?
So I have not read this paper, but I'm pretty sure that they tried that in Utah and it didn't work.
It didn't work. Okay.
Yeah, because I think the town deer they're so used to the resources just being available throughout the year. They can go and eat someone's garden and it's highly nutritious.
It's easy picking.
Yeah. And so I think that's probably part of it. I have not read that paper, so I take all that with a grain of salt, but my guess is that they just don't have the skill set to make it in these wild areas because they're they don't need it in town.
What about being able to look at some of that past study, finding a little bit more? Well, one thing I've always been impressed with the Monteith Shop is the ability to think outside the box, the ability to really analyze and then align with the right scientist or researcher as yourself, or many. I mean, you have a host of great scientists within the shop, but to come up with new efforts to learn more. And to me, that's a game changer. Mm-hmm. And I'm so grateful for the department that we have and the leadership of our department, that they're also wanting to be at the cutting edge of information and pursue the unknown. Isn't that what drives a scientist?
Yeah. My favorite thing about being a scientist is being in the field and watching the animals I study. A very close second is using the data that we've garnered over this last decade to answer questions and to figure out what these animals are doing and why they're doing what they're doing.
Oh, that's very cool. Postdoc work.
Yeah, so I think I'm hopefully going to be working on a couple of projects that on the Wyoming Range project, finishing up some of the work that I've been doing outside of my dissertation. I am interested. So Rebecca Rafferty, I'm not sure what you guys talked about, but Rebecca,
a lot, but it was great.
So Rebecca she might have mentioned this. Some of her work is going to be looking at how fire and wildfire on the landscape potentially influences the vegetation communities and what that means for the fat of these animals.
We did not talk about that. I'm glad you brought it up, though.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be huge, especially because we now know that fat and how much fat is important. We can kind of start to tie these pieces together. And so she's really going to be leading that. And then I'm hopefully going to be working on some additional components, looking at other aspects that might be influencing fat levels as well in the Wyoming Range.
Can we talk a little bit about the vegetation on the landscape? There is different vegetation depending on the season that these critters need. From a hunter's perspective, there are vegetations in the fall that deer tend to want to seek out, want to find, and that can play to the benefit of a hunter who is trying to locate deer. Mm-hmm. The vegetation that you have found in the fall that would be very advantageous for deer to be seeking, that, you know, if you're a hunter and you can find this vegetation in large groups on the landscape, then there's a good chance there might be deer.
So,
or is that too forward?
Well, most of our work it's mostly focused on the female deer in the summertime during that peak parturition. So when they are just giving birth and when they're at the most energetically expensive part of the lactation period. So most of the vegetation work we've done is focused either on that or on winter range, where we're measuring the sagebrush that they are going to have available to eat over winter. So I haven't done a lot of work on kind of what they're selecting for in the fall.
But I would imagine it's mountain mahogany, bitterbrush.
For sure. Mountain mahogany is a huge one.
Spring or early season after parturition, geranium.
Geranium's
very
huge.
rich in nutrition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And hollyhock.
Hollyhock. Yeah.
And fireweed as well. Strawberry is also, we've seen it in a lot of their diets as well.
Yeah, I would imagine from a conservation effort for habitat treatments, would you give an indication in your mind, not that one would be more prevalent than the other, but as a landscape or working with land managers, whether it's federal or state or privately owned, at this point in time, do you believe that there is more emphasis that should be put on either summer range or winter range, or do they have to be equally held in the same regard?
I think they have to be equally held. These deer can't make it through winter if they don't have access to food. They have to keep eating. And if we're not making sure that their winter range is producing viable sagebrush and enough sagebrush to support this population, they're not going to make it. But at the same time, we know how important summer is because that's the time when they're building up fat. And so I think we do need to focus on both of these. But I think especially as we start thinking about winter and what we want these animals to be starting the winter with, the fat on their back, we also need to pay close attention to the summer range as well.
Is there a critical time in the summer where those fat reserves, we're no longer putting as much resources and effort into raising our fawn, but now we're really turning the tide to build for winter? Is there a particular time of the year, July, August, September, where that is just like, I've been able to, and I say I'm using it as that you have observed that, oh man, there has been a change in the behavior to now we're putting fuel in the fuel tank.
I don't know if there's a specific point where they are shifting that. The most energetically part of raising a fawn happens at about 3 to 4 weeks of the fawns, after the fawn's born. That's when they have to put the most energy into producing milk to raise those fawns up. But the other thing to think about is the plants are most digestible and they're getting the most energy they can out of them during those early stages before they've started to grow really big and have a lot of fiber in them. And so that early period when they're both trying to produce high quality milk and put on fat, that's the time when they have access to those plants that are at the most nutritional stage.
Sure. When they're leaving summer range, Taylor, you've been watching this firsthand. Those stopover areas between that transition from summer range to winter range are very important. Still building fuel at that point?
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so some of the work that Anna Ortega has done, she's also out of the university. She just finished her PhD as well, also looked at that. And you can see that as they're migrating down, they're kind of fighting the snow while also fighting that onset of snow that's kind of pushing them, while also taking advantage of the resources as they're migrating back down to their winter ranges. So they're still eating and building up as they move.
So it's those early winter storms that really, which we seen last year.
Yeah,
they started early and they never let up. That's the conundrum that becomes challenging for them to overcome.
Yeah, for sure.
Taylor, it has been a pleasure to visit with you about this. It brings to light a lot of considerations, a lot of thoughts, a lot of questions, and I hope as folks are listening to this, if they are interested in engaging as our MFF fellow, that we are very proud to have. I would like to be able to say it now. We haven't done this yet on any prior podcast, but I would like to say that if there are some follow-up specific to Taylor, you have been very approachable as the MFF fellow for us to be able to reach out to you and get back to us in a timely manner. If this does bring to light some questions or some concerns or thoughts or ideas or anything under the sun, for that matter, specific to this conversation, you can email me directly, josh@muleyfanatic.org. And I would be happy to relay that information to Taylor if it requires us sitting down again and having some discussion on some questions. I know we've had already several people engage on some of our prior episodes with Kevin that I think is healthy to figure out how can we continue to facilitate providing information. Again, information is a tool. We want to be able to use this platform as a tool to help people maybe understand or see through a different set of optics of what they may have thought was just the gospel, and maybe there's a little bit more to it. But I think your work and the level of just finite precision that you have put into this and this deer herd, which is cherished by many, it's profound. And it's an investment that I think is very worthy, and we're very grateful to have the partnership with you. What would you like to close on?
I guess I just want to say thank you for having me on here, and also the support that you guys have for both me and the Monteith Shop. I'm so grateful and so honored to be able to do this work, and it's wonderful to have partners like you guys as we start doing some good stuff.
I can speak for many when I say we're equally as grateful from all of our chapters to the members that we have, knowing that this was historic to have this commitment to this MFF fellow specific to Mule Deer. It's a feather in our cap that we're very proud of, and you have been a great ambassador, and we're excited you ride for the brand and the work that you do. I just can't say thanks enough. I unfortunately I lack the vocabulary to be able to just express my sincerest gratitude for the genuine effort you have put forth in your education. And I will end on this. I am very grateful that for your postdoc, you have decided to stay in Wyoming. It would have been very, very disheartening to see this effort go somewhere else. Although wherever you went, I know you would do great work, but we're a little selfish, and we're very grateful that you're sticking around the Cowboy State.
Thanks, Josh.
That's a wrap on Wild Things in Wild Places with Tayler LaSharr. And again, congratulations on the PhD. Stay tuned for more information and more episodes every Tuesday. A launch of a new episode with Wild Things in Wild Places. And don't forget to stick around for Campfire Chat.
Gathered around the campfire's flickering glow, stories ignited, bridging hearts and minds as the world outside faded and connection reigned supreme. Welcome to Campfire Chats.
And welcome. I'm your host, Josh Corsi, part of Wild Things and Wild Places, Muley Fanatic Foundation production. Campfire Chat, my favorite segment here, just to be able to visit and celebrate the passion of hunting and everything it means and why it's such an important way of life and part of our heritage and culture. And joining me today, Mitch Burnett. Mitch, welcome to Campfire Chat.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you are a hunter. You identify as a hunter.
For sure. Yeah, I identify as a hunter, yeah.
Yeah. Earliest hunting memory?
First time I ever went hunting, I went on a duck hunt with my dad and my uncle. Nothing too exciting to write home about, though. I don't know if they even killed any ducks on the hunt, but I was pumped about it. I was so excited.
Like the night before, like a kid at Christmas
Getting
time?
all my gear ready, just pumped up, yeah.
And you grew up in Ontario or in the Ontario area?
Yep, Ontario, Canada, yep.
Okay. When you talk about hunting and you talk about just that fascination and excitement and just, how your mind gets away with you the night before, does that still happen to you today?
For sure. I can't sleep before I go on a big hunting trip. Yeah,
that's it.
I love it. Yeah.
All right, so I'm kind of a gearhead. I kind of like to, I kind of have a little CDO, which is like OCD, except the letters are in order. I like to get all my gear out. I lay it all over the floor, and I start figuring out what stuff I can cut to cut weight, and I'm little things like that just kind of are part of the process that I like. Similar for you, or
for sure, and it's evolved along the way. I grew up hunting in the East, dragging our whitetails out to the truck, and it's a different world here. So I've had to learn. It's been a crash course in hunting Western game, and trying to lighten weight and figure out all my gear. So I'm a gearhead for sure, and getting everything lined out the night before, always getting everything figured out for sure. Yeah.
So you've been here a few years now as a research scientist at the University of Wyoming, but you've had some hunting opportunities since you've been here, which I'm sure was part of the process that you were like, man, if I nail this gig, I'm going to expand my hunting repertoire.
It was pretty appealing for sure. Yeah. Chasing elk, chasing mule deer, antelope, all kinds of stuff. For sure.
And you've had success with all three of those big game?
Yep. Yeah. I've only hunted mule deer once, actually. If I have a regret of my time here, I wish I spent a little more time chasing mule deer for sure. I've hunted one morning for mule deer and killed a buck, and that was it. But I've killed a pile of elk and a pile of antelope. Get one or two every year. So yeah.
Rifle hunter, archery, both.
Yep. I love chasing elk with the bow, but for the most part, I'm rifle hunter. I've killed one pronghorn with the bow and a nice 6x6 bull this past September with the bow, which was a blast.
So what's a family in Ontario think when they see these pictures of this Western big game harvest?
The non-hunters think it's kind of crazy. It's just unfamiliar to them for sure. But folks like my dad and uncle and stuff, guys I grew up with or hunted with as a kid, they love it. They love it. My dad, I can always count on him to be the first one to call me when I send him a text of a picture of a bull or something after coming out of the field for sure.
Yeah, of the three pronghorn deer and elk, you got a preferred one that you prefer to consume?
Consume, I would say consume and hunt. My favorite is elk. I gotta say, I love the meat's awesome. I love. I'm a sucker for calling in game. So September elk hunting, and then my other big passion is turkey hunting in the spring. I love turkey hunting, and for both, it's the calling aspect for sure.
Just that interaction with the critter, huh? Yeah, in their backyard. Being able to try to match wits with them.
Yeah. It's the chess game of tricking them and bringing them in.
Yeah, that's exciting. Being a gear guy, favorite piece of gear?
Ooh, that's tough.
Or is there one piece of gear? Maybe not favorite. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe that's too loaded of a question. Is there one piece of gear that is absolutely instrumental in every hunt you've been on, whether it's archery or rifle? This goes and. Maybe something, maybe a good luck charm or
good luck charm. I've got some hats that are good luck charms for sure. I got a Holbrook team hat that's so I was co-advised by Kevin Monteith and then Joe Holbrook. I have a Holbrook team hat from him, a camo hat that for whatever reason I've noticed I seem to be successful wearing. So that makes an appearance often when I'm hunting for sure. And then, I don't know, favorite gear. That's tough. There's so many things are key for sure. I mean, playing off my interest and passion for calling. I mean, certainly having a call in hand, whether that's like a diaphragm. I've pretty much in my bino harness, there's always a diaphragm call, and I can, make most calls with that. Right.
Yeah. Particular brand of binos that you've been using?
Vortex.
Okay. Yeah. Rifle scope, Vortex also? Are you brand specific or are you across the board?
I have a cheap, terrible, like no name brand scope on my rifle. It does the job, but so I had to, it's a real headache, crossing borders with guns as far as, especially when you're staying long-term. So, and also now I'm not allowed. So now I'm moving back to Canada for my PhD, but US regulations don't allow you to, as a non-citizen of the US, I'm not allowed to leave the country with a gun. So I ended up just buying a pretty cheap Remington 700 that had a little scope package on it for my time here, which has served me well, but it's certainly not a nice setup by any means.
And you're leaving that with the Monteith Shop? Or?
I'll probably try and sell that in the next month or so here before I head out.
Get out, yeah. What about your knife? I'm a knife guy. My wife says, you need another knife? You
always need another knife.
You can't have two.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Certain knife you use?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of what that model is. It's one of the Benchmade, maybe Steep Country. I think that's what it's called. It's like an orange handle, pretty minimalist, fixed blade knife is my kind of go-to in the field right now.
Yeah, Benchmade makes a great knife, don't
For sure.
Yeah, that Benchmade Griptilian with the Tonto tip that was discontinued a few years ago, I thought was a travesty. How could you get rid of that? Because inevitably I'll lose mine.
Right. Have to stockpile when you like one, I guess.
Yeah. So what about when you have an animal that you've harvested, being able to share that meat? That's one thing about the recreational sport of hunting that I think needs a little bit more promotion, is how important that game meat is, and to be able to consume something that is organic, if you will. I know a lot of misuse of that word sometimes, but how important is the dietary staple of wild game to you?
Huge. I love cooking. I love hunting, period, but it's an added plus that I don't buy other meat. That's my sole protein food source, right? So it's huge for me. I've been fortunate enough to harvest enough animals that I can give some away to other folks, people in my lab that either don't hunt much or aren't hunters, but are interested in game meat. I give away quite a bit of meat every year. Then I'm into other things too, fishing. And then one thing I've really gotten into in my time here is catching crawfish and doing big crawfish boils for the lab. And for that, I put in some smoked elk andouille sausage in the boil, and those are awesome as well.
Oh man, that almost sounds Cajun.
Oh yeah, it is for sure. For sure. That's the inspiration.
Cajun food in Wyoming.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. On that note, I guess when you talk about being able to share that meat, have you found that there seems to be a growing consensus of people that maybe just don't value or respect the role that hunting plays in regards to conservation as a professional scientist in that community? You certainly value and know the role that hunters play in conservation, but do you feel like the general population of folks do, or no? No. Certainly, I would say the general population of folks are not appreciative of hunters, and a lot of people, certainly it's hard for people to comprehend how could you kill an animal and care about it so much. Like it just doesn't compute for a lot of these folks. And I was mentioning to you earlier, and this is kind of one of the most alarming factors to me is, historically wildlife researchers have been hunters. Those are the people that are most invested in wildlife because they're users of wildlife and they want to see wildlife out there for them to pursue. And what's alarming is, in my undergraduate degree studying wildlife biology and conservation, a field that, historically would be dominated by hunters, I saw no hunters in that time at all. Now, what's fortunate is I see, out here at University of Wyoming, the same case is not true. So here we have a lot of folks that
didn't grow up hunting, maybe even grew up anti-hunting, but they seem to be pretty receptive to the idea of what hunting is and the value it holds for wildlife populations. So we see a lot of adult onset hunters in among the folks that are wildlife researchers at the University of Wyoming, which is a positive thing for me to see, given my background and experience during my undergrad.
Yeah, I would imagine going to British Columbia, Western Canada, maybe that'll be a little bit different than your undergrad work in Eastern Canada.
Different for sure. I think it'll be maybe somewhere in between my experience in Wyoming and back in Eastern Canada, as far as the number of folks that are hunters and are into hunting and see the value of that.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, the value of hunting, because I would love to be able to continue to promote and showcase how valuable. And to me, it's at the highest priority. It's a way of life for me and my family. It's something that needs to be promoted, and therefore it also needs to be preserved and protected. And that starts each of us as an ambassador to how valuable hunting is. Dream hunt, if you could pick a dream hunt anywhere on the planet.
I'm about to do it all. If I go to BC every year, there you can hunt stone sheep, caribou, mountain goat, moose, all over the counter. So that's the plan for the coming years.
Is that why you're going?
I mean, again, it's a perk for sure. Yeah.
Wow. Particular animal that you just have this ultimate respect and fascination with, that you've never been able to have the opportunity to eat, but you're looking forward to trying it?
I've never eaten mountain lion at all, which I would like to try. And then stone sheep again is up there. I've had bighorn sheep a few times. Haven't had the opportunity to hunt them. But those are kind of two that I'd like to chase more. And I've collared mountain lions, so I've had kind of the hunt experience without the hunt as a culmination of that. But I'd like to get more into that. And then, yeah, like I said, looking forward to the stone sheep hunting and chasing them as well.
Yeah, I've had a few people that have told me that the backstraps of mountain lion are delicious.
Yeah.
You've probably heard the same.
Like pork is what they say.
Yeah, I've heard that too. Yeah, I haven't had the pleasure to have that as well. Have you tried bear?
I've not like a straight cut regular recipe. I've had like snack stick bear type stuff, but so it doesn't really give you the full experience. I tried chasing bears for the first time this spring. Unfortunately, the area I wanted to get into got hammered with snow, as most of Wyoming did, but that area in particular was quite a bit behind on melt. And then I ended up being away when it would have been the best time. And then we have the quotas here in Wyoming, and the quota closed on me before I was able to get out. So I only went out like 2 days total and in some not ideal areas and didn't get on anything. But that's something I'd like to mess with more for sure. And another thing I'm looking forward to in BC.
Yeah. Last question, Mitch. Your elk, you've kind of prioritized that as your favorite big game animal to be able to harvest out west and to have that opportunity to be able to provide that food source for you and members of your team that you've been able to share that with. Favorite recipe? You got something that you would share with someone that, besides just grilling it, medium rare? And
I'm a street taco guy. I do all kinds.
Amen, brother. You are preaching to the choir.
There you go. Yeah, all kinds of different tacos. Tacos de lengua, a little tongue action. I like
really?
That. Yeah. I'm into all of it. So yeah, that I usually get a few different cuts out, do different recipes, and that's another one that I'll do for bigger groups as well.
Yeah. Do you eat the heart?
I'm not big on heart. I haven't messed with it. I like liver, love liver.
Okay.
But I'm not a big heart guy, no.
All right, let me ask you this. On that same note, when it comes to processing various portions of the critter, do you save the rib meat?
I have in most cases. I am less lately. I just find on most wild game, the yield there, it's like, I don't know sometimes I struggle to see if it's worth my time. I'd like to, most of the time when I kill something, it's pretty far back in. If I shoot something pretty accessible, I'd like to take out like a whole rib rack and leave it on the bone and cook it up like that. But no, I'm less so now. I seem to be drifting away from taking rib meat.
Yeah, and I haven't, but that is the goal moving forward. That is the aim this fall. Given that success, that I would put more effort and emphasis on retaining that and doing exactly what you said, to be able to bring back. I mean, because I love ribs.
Right.
I mean, I've never done that in the field.
Right.
You know, I've become so accustomed to the quick quarter and get out the back straps and tenderloins, and then, you know, I have put some effort into that neck meat because I do like that. But I've always overlooked the rib meat.
Yeah, I pull a lot of neck meat for sure, and I like to do like a pot roast style thing with neck meat, which then you can use in all kinds of different stuff. And but yeah, rib meat, I have a tough time with rib meat a bit. It's just I'm feeling less and less like it's worth my time, which I feel a little guilty saying. But
yeah, me too. And that's why I want to change it. I watched a YouTube video of a guy who really, I mean, he made it look so simple how he was able to just pull that whole rib off, rib meat off just as like a layer. And I'm like, man, why haven't I done that?
Yeah, do the rib roll method where you're just like filleting it off the bone. Yeah, I've messed with it, and it's useful, but I don't know. There's just, you kind of got to go grind on that. There's not a lot else you can do once you've pulled it off in that way. And
right. Yeah. It's good stuff. It's great just to be able to talk about hunting with somebody who identifies as a hunter. It's something that makes us brothers, and the brotherhood of the overall just banner of pride in my mind, that we can wear the hat and say that we're hunters. We kill stuff and we eat it, and we do it to the best of our aim to be responsible. And so that, I just appreciate your time to talk about it. It's cool.
I appreciate you doing this. The campfire stories is a nice aspect to these. It's awesome.
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Mitch. And best of luck to you in BC. I look forward to seeing pictures and hearing about your future endeavors there as you take to the field to be the hunter and to develop that skill set in that landscape, and to, at the end of the day, put meat in your freezer for you and yours.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. That's Campfire Chat. Just talking hunting and celebrating the passion that we hold so dear. Till next time, happy trails.
And that wraps up another episode of Wild Things and Wild Places. But remember, the journey doesn't end here. Make sure you never miss out by subscribing. Whether you're listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, streaming us on our website, or following us on social media, subscribing is the best way to stay connected. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more wild episodes.
Everybody knows I'm a Muley Fanatic.